Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to revisit our flow control again, and specifically, we are going to be looking at nested if statements. This time around, I am going to be using a tool to visually demonstrate what our code looks like. Now, this video assumes a number of things that you've been following along with the fundamentals demo and have already gotten your if statements 04 demo working. You'll see that I have it on my screen right now, and I'm just going to briefly go through it. It's a nested if statement, and it checks two conditions. Number one, whether it is raining or not, and then the temperature based on user input. And then from there, it tells the user what clothing to wear. And you'll see that my outer if statement essentially handles the is raining variable, including checking to see if it's equal to 0 or equal to 1. And then it also has an else statement in there that will handle the scenario where the user was not paying attention and entered in a value other than 0 or 1. Now, the inner if statement is replicated between the two branches of the outer if and else if. The idea is that it checks the second condition to see if the temperature is less than 70, and then the implied portion of it under the else is that it is greater than or equal to 70. Now, the idea here isn't that we're going to redo the code here, but rather what we're going to do is we're going to see a way to visually demonstrate this. I'm going to do this with a combination of things. I'm going to provide you with the links to the flowchart Wikipedia page that has a little table that gives some recommended symbols here. My apologies. Took me a second to pull the page up. Some recommended symbols here. We're only going to be focusing on a couple of them, mainly the arrow that allows for you to see how your code flows. In other words, what element or what segment it goes to, from where it goes to and where it goes to, where it comes from and where it goes to, rather. For this particular example, we're going to be including a terminal block to indicate where a process starts or stops. We're not going to be looking at a process necessarily. We're going to be looking at an entire function. So we'll come back to that particular example. And then we have our decision blocks as well as our input and output blocks. And again, for this particular example, we're just going to be focusing on these first few symbols. We're going to get much more in depth with our flow control. But for right now, what we want to do is use our draw.io or apps.diagrams.net tool. And got a couple of things. You can go ahead and select the flow charting tool or just create a blank diagram. It doesn't really matter. I prefer to just simply start from scratch here. And what I'll do is I will go find our particular module here. And for this one right here, this is going to be our if statements _04. That's the example that we're going to be doing in this video, and go ahead and save that. Now, what you want to do is pull up that Wikipedia article that I have, because again, it's just a nice little summary of the individual elements, the individual symbols. And again, we're going to have plenty of opportunity to go through each of these, but I'm going to start off by using one of these rounded rectangles at both the beginning and the end of our process. Okay, so the idea is that you want to sort of start off as thinking about how do you want to get from the start of your function down to the end of your function. And there's a number of ways that we can go about doing this as far as how sophisticated we want to get. I'm just going to keep this one simple, and then I'm just going to put the name of our function in here. There's a number of things that you can put here, but we're just going to start off with if statement _04. And the idea here is that is essentially where your code starts running. Now, there's all sorts of level of detail and granularity that you can provide in this, including going through and specifying how you're declaring and initializing the variables. And by the way, I noticed just now as I was walking through this particular example here, as I did not actually initialize these values. I want to get into a good habit of doing so. I'll probably put a little comment in the video, in that particular video, just to indicate that we forgot to do this. You see it, go ahead and correct it. All right, so you can go ahead and include blocks for statements like this. But for this particular video, what I want to do is I want to focus just on the inputs and then the if statement, so you could sort of get an idea of how this works as far as visually demonstrating your code. So the idea is basically, how do you get from the start of your function all the way down to the end of your function? And again, what we can do is we can go ahead and include a block in here. We're going to just generalize it here. We're going to declare and initialize variables, and that's fine. You can include code, or you can just simply have a generic statement like this. Either is perfectly fine for this particular example. But then what we want to do is we want to follow it up with a couple of parallelograms. Remember, the parallelograms indicate that it was some sort of IO from the user. In that, what we want to do here is we want to prompt for is raining. And again, if it doesn't quite fit on this, that's perfectly okay. You can always resize these as necessary. But then what we're going to do is we're going to follow this up with one more additional parallelogram. Again, I'm just trying to line this up. And then we're going to have then our prompt for the temperature. And all I'm doing here to get it on this second line is just letting it wrap, or hitting Shift Enter, either is fine. At this point, then what we want to do is we want to jump into the actual decision-making process for the code. Before we do that, I'll tell you what, why don't we go ahead and take a second to go ahead and draw our arrows to connect, to show how our code is essentially going from one block to another. I think I can probably shift this over just a little bit to get this lined up a little better. I was trying, you probably noticed earlier, I was trying to get these to line up correctly, and for some reason they didn't initially. All right, and then so at this point, then what we want to do is do the decisions that correspond to our if statements. I'm going to go ahead and drop one of the diamonds in here, and then we're going to bounce back over to NetBeans real quick so you can see which decision I'm looking at. And I'm trying to find out if is raining is equal to 0. Now you got a couple options here. Again, you can actually write it out much like what I have been doing in more of a human-friendly terms, or go ahead and put a little bit of code in, or a mix of the two. Either is perfectly fine, as long as you're conveying the message is really what you're hoping to do here. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste code in there, and again, probably going to go ahead and do a Shift Enter just so that we can get it to look a little bit better. And the idea here is that once you leave the input prompts, then you're going to be going into that decision-making process. And then at this point, then you've got a couple of options. You have a true branch, and I'm just going to go ahead and start by drawing the arrow out here. And then you've got a false branch. Again, we can adjust the arrows as necessary. The false branch, if you recall, and we can again go back to look at the code real quick. I've tried to give us a little more room. The false branch then causes us to get another prompt, and that is to check, rather not another prompt, but another condition check, and that is to check to see if is raining is equal to 1. And we'll come back to that true branch in just a second. There's a variety of ways that you could do this a little more systematically. Again, this is just kind of a first pass at this. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and drop another decision down there. And then for the text, then I'm just going to check to see if is raining then is equal to 1. And again, what this is going to represent, this then is going to be our false branch. And this right here is going to represent our true branch. And then we'll have another one for the true branch for the second condition. And you can quickly see here how we're going to have to extend this a little bit. Again, this is going to be a little bit of an art, a little bit of a science. It's going to take a little bit of practice to get this. Our false branch, if you recall, and we can go back again to the code real quick. Our false branch is essentially our else. It terminates with our else. We're going to come back in just a second to see what that looks like. But what you want to do is start off by just simply putting each one of the paths here, whether it's true or false, just so you can identify what those would be. And essentially, each of these paths then represent the results of those decisions. All right, so go back to your code one more time. Again, this is going to be kind of iterative. I encourage you to possibly have a second screen up. And then what we can do is then start flushing out some of the details inside of each of these branches here. You'll see, for instance, that we check to see if the temperature is less than 70. So essentially what we've got is another decision here. And then ultimately, then if it is less than 70, we pick a jacket. And if it's greater than 70, greater than or equal to 70, then we pick some shorts. But fundamentally, we've got another decision here. So in order to handle that, you've guessed it, we will come in here and we will add yet one more diamond. And at this point, again, what you can do is sort of a combination of pseudocode, real code. You can play around with the fonts, etc. There's all sorts of possibilities here as far as making this a little more easier to read, a little better aesthetics. I'm just going to keep this one simple for this video here. But what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the temperature is less than 70. And if that was true, then recall that basically is raining is equal to 0 or false. The temperature is less than 70, at which point then we actually assigned a value. In this case, what we will do here is we'll actually use one of these code blocks or process blocks. Again, this one's probably too big. We're just going to abbreviate it then to a jacket. In other words, indicates that we are to choose a jacket, which brings us then to the false branch here, which I'm going to hopefully have enough room for everything. We'll play around a little bit with it just a second, clean it up a little bit. Might have a little more room for this arrow. I'll bring it down just a tiny little bit farther, but then I'm going to drop another block in here. And the idea is that then this represents where is raining is equal to false, and the temperature is greater than or equal to 70, which, if you recall, meant that we wear shorts. And then we should have just enough room, if I've done this right, to sneak in one more diamond here. We may want to shorten this up ever so slightly. Shorten this arrow up. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it and redraw it. Again, you're going to get plenty of practice at this as far as making this look aesthetically nice. Seem to have missed my touch points here. There we go. And then if you recall, we actually duplicate the question for the temperature in both of the branches of the outer if statement. So just like you saw redundant code here, where we check the temperature both in the true branch, the first true branch, as well as the else if branch. Well, same thing is going to be visually true, in that you'll have two diamonds that look identical from that perspective. However, though, the results are going to lead to different articles of clothing. And again, what you do here is you simply just draw the appropriate symbols or elements. So again, if is raining is equal to 1 or true, and the temperature is less than 70, we agreed then that we would probably be taking a trench coat. And if it was raining, but the temperature was greater than or equal to 70, then again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to be careful here to try to make this look somewhat similar. And then this block right here would be an umbrella. So again, just to refresh your memory here, that means that it is raining, but that the temperature is greater than or equal to 70. And then finally down here in this block here, this else, then was our warning. And so you can simply say error, unhandled, something along those lines that indicates that there was a problem. In other words, we remember that the scenario would be that the user entered in some other value for is raining than what we expected. Now, the reason that I decided to go ahead and include our start and our end at the very beginning, even though it kind of looked a little strange to start there, was because the most commonly forgotten thing is how do you exit your function? In other words, if you recall correctly from your code, that basically it has to get down here to the bottom outside of these curly braces. And in this particular example, we don't have a return value, so it isn't immediately apparent, but ultimately all of the code has to then exit the function. And to accomplish this visually, we'll take a little bit of practice here, but basically what we will do is we will draw our arrows, and I'm just going to draw the first one completely wrong here, and then hopefully we can recover from it. There we go. Oops, I grabbed it in the wrong spot there. Let me see if I can grab the arrow May have to zoom in here just a little bit. Tell you what, I'm going to start that back over. You'll see there's a little bit of trial and error with this, or with any tool. Probably just going to do this as somewhat of a two-step process, maybe. We'll start. Let's go ahead and drag this maybe into the side. And what we can do is we can then simply, I'm having a little bit of bad luck as far as where the points, the adjustment points are popping up. They usually a little bit more friendly than this. Just again, just a little bit of bad luck here. And at this point, then what you can do is just play around with your arrow just a little bit. In this case, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to get it to come in to here, to this point right here. And I'm doing this specifically because I can probably get this to line up pretty well. Although again, for this particular video, I'm not going to worry about it making it perfect here. But at this point, then we can do the same thing with this path. And then ultimately what you can do is you can actually get your arrows to overlap. Although this one is definitely trying to have some fun with me. There is no question about that. But I think you can see here, I think I don't have my snap to grid on for this particular one. If you go here to the arrange, snap to grid, and I seem to be having just a little bit of a challenge here. But again, you get the general idea. Before I mess this one up anymore, I'm going to go ahead and stop before I have to delete it and start all the way back over. I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and do this one more time. This generally is not this complicated. All right, so one more time, I'm going to go ahead and draw my arrow down. I'm going to get it to come in here to the side. And this is, again, just a little bit of bad luck. You also notice that one of the things that you can do is just simply have the arrow then touch this way. We're going to do the same thing here, so we won't worry so much about overlapping. I would like to try to get this one to come in at the same exit point if I can. I'll give it one more time, one more shot here to see if I can get this right. And if not, then we will just simply call it. I'm not really sure why this particular one is being problematic. I think it might be as a result of me trying to record, but that line is definitely wrong, and I'm not sure exactly why it's doing that to me. All right, so anyway, at this point, rather than just playing with it, making it look a little bit better, you'll see that I just need to make sure that all of my results or all of my paths come back to the end of our function. Now, this is not going to be the only time that we're going to see flowcharts. We're actually going to do this for a couple of our projects, as well as I'm going to show you how to do it for one more if statement for that flat if statement structure. But as always, hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And real quick, I noticed that there is one other line that I accidentally forgot to connect here, and that is from the start of our function. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.